Good evening. Hi. I'm Carol Ullman-Morden, the Executive Director of the Osher Lifelong Learning Institute at Berkshire Community College. I am so glad you're here this evening in this beautiful space. We respectfully acknowledge that we gather on the ancestral homelands of Mexicana, the people of the waters that are never still. Despite being forced to move from this land, they continue as a sovereign tribal nation in Wisconsin with deep interest in and commitment to the Berkshires. We pay honor and respect to their ancestors and seek to honor and learn from the wisdom of their culture. We thank them for their stewardship of these lands and acknowledge the injustices they have experienced in the past and continue to experience in the present. We are committed to act in partnership and with the support of Indigenous peoples of the Northeast as we learn about their history, celebrate their culture, and engage with their artists, writers, musicians, naturalists, and scholars. This evening, we are delighted to welcome Henries. Henries is a member of the Chaubunagungamaug. Did I do that okay? Chaubunagungamaug? Yes. I practiced a lot today. Band of the Nipmuc, a Native American community from Massachusetts. In concert, Henries shares both the Nipmuc musical tradition, but also the stories behind their music. His music has been featured in award-winning documentaries. A repeat performer in the New Orleans Jazz Festival and the Tunica-Biloxi Pow Wow, Hog's music carries his listeners across musical and cultural boundaries. We hope you enjoy this concert, and please note that there are many programs including lectures, book discussions, walking tours, and art exhibits that are ongoing. You can learn more at berkshireolli.org, or you can grab some flyers that are on the side tables in the room here. Additionally, our fall semester of OLLI classes begins on September 19th, and again, that's berkshireolli.org. Finally, I offer gratitude to all the volunteers who made tonight possible, particularly our University Days committee members, many of whom are here tonight helping out. And thank you to Lutheran Zion for your welcome and use of this space. And of course, thank you to Henries for being here to share your music with us tonight. So, without further ado, Henries.
Thanks. I think you can hear me okay now, right? Thanks so much for inviting me to be here. Thank you for being here and for being. This evening I have, as you well know, some flutes and a few other instruments to play for you. I like to talk quite a bit. I like to talk maybe more than I even like to play music. So with that in mind, I would encourage you to not allow me to talk at length. And you can do so by talking with me. And the idea of this being an opportunity for us to share ideas and learn more about each other, with that in mind, I would encourage you to ask me questions should you have some. And particularly, I love questions that oftentimes the person asking might think they're offensive or rude or too silly. And I find that those questions usually have a lot of substance to them. So anything that should come to your mind, you're more than welcome to ask. And if you have just ideas or thoughts that you'd like to share that aren't really questions, then know that you're welcome to do that as well. A little bit about my flute making life. I began building flutes about 34 years ago. Prior to making flutes, I didn't play music. I didn't really know much about music except for certain types that I enjoyed listening to. And one of which was the native flute, or what some people think of as the Native American flute. I had listened to it for a number of years. 30 some odd years ago, there were only a few makers and players of this kind of instrument. One day I was listening to the flute and I heard it a little bit differently than I had in previous years, and I knew that I needed to play it. And so what happened after that was I started looking everywhere I went for a flute that I could bring home and that I could play. And as I mentioned, there weren't very many makers of this instrument. So there weren't very many for me to look at and consider owning. But I looked, and sometimes I get really narrowly focused. So whenever we went anywhere, my family and I, my first thought was, I need to find a flute, I need to find a flute. And that kind of transformed into whining about a flute. And I have to tell you, whining is a very effective tool for a number of things. But I whined for about 3 years, and finally my family got tired of my whining, and they put some money together and they purchased my first flute. And, well, this is a long story, so I'll just try to be brief with it. My work prior to being a flute maker was with children in long-term residential treatment, children with autism and developmental disabilities. And one day I came home from work, it was around Christmas time. My week had been particularly, draining. And when I walked in the door, my wife was there, of course, and a friend was there. They were excited to see me, and they mentioned that I should look at the Christmas tree. And I looked at the Christmas tree and said, oh, that's a pretty tree. I mean, I helped put it up, so I knew it was there. So I looked and I said, okay, that's nice, I need to sit down. And they said, no, look again. And I looked again, and the lights were twinkling, and we use a lot of tinsel, so that was sparkling too. And I said, I really need to sit. And they said, no, look again. And wasn't this flute? I looked again, and as I looked close at the trunk of the tree, I noticed that there was an object that looked like a flute nestled in the branches. And I thought to myself, I must have had a really tough day the whole week, because I'm hallucinating now. I'm seeing a flute in this Christmas tree. And they said, go closer, and I did. And when I got closer, I saw that, in fact, it was a flute. So I took the flute, and I looked, at my family, and then I just began to weep. I couldn't do anything but that. Tears flowed, and I held the flute very close to me and made some horrendous noises on it. And for the next 3 months or so, that flute came with me everywhere I went. I'm the dishwasher in my family. That's my most favorite domestic job. At the time, if I were washing dishes, the flute would be by my side, and I'd wash a glass, and then dry my hands and pick up the flute and play it. It took me hours to get the dishes done. Anywhere outside or, in the bathroom was the best place, because nobody would come in to disturb me, or I'd bring that flute with me. And so everywhere I went, the flute was with me. And then one day I heard this voice. I'm grateful for this voice, but it was one in my head that said, make it sound better. At the time, I knew nothing about how these instruments worked. I didn't know anything about how any instruments worked. But I listened to that voice, and I found some tools, files and knives and things like that. And I started working on this flute to make it better. And literally, in 5 minutes, the flute no longer played. And that for my family may have been a blessing, because I didn't know how to play it. But for me, it made me distraught. I was so upset that this gift that was so important to me was ruined in such a short period of time. And at that point, I knew that they would never give me another, so I needed to fix it. And for the next 6 months, every spare moment that I had was with that flute. And I filed more and carved more and, really ruined it even more than it was already ruined. And close to 6 months into this process, I thought, I actually need to reconstruct it as best I can. And so I did. And I was able to make that flute play again. And from that experience, there were a couple of things that, at least for me, are important. One was the knowledge about building flutes. I'm more than grateful for this journey that this past 34 years that this flute has taken my family and I on. Two, and maybe this is the most important one for me, is that sometimes our inhibitions or maybe even fears stop us from exploring something that we've never explored before, something that we've never experienced. And I think that the flute kind of, me ruining the flute gave me a little bit of courage to try new things, you know, things that maybe at one point in time I would have said, oh, absolutely not, for fear of something happening. But now I'm pretty wide open to all kinds of crazy things like hot sauce, but that's another story. So I'd like to play you a song. This first song that I'd like to play is one called Thanksgiving. And Thanksgiving is somewhat very simple in terms of the origin of the song. I was thinking about the magic of life, the gifts that we have every day that contribute to and enable our living. And that list, as we all know, is very, very long. But a couple of things that I try not to take for granted are things like being able to see, and being able to hear, and smell, and taste, and move. And this one is the ultimate magic, being able to feel. And I mentioned working with children in long-term treatment. There was one young girl one day who rested her arm on a hot stove, an electric stove, but her brain didn't process this, so she left it there. And it really made me think of the magic of feeling rain, or snow, or when someone caresses you, or even those pesky mosquitoes when they poke you. And so this song is simply my gratitude for these mundane, everyday, magical gifts that we have. was talking with Kate. Kate gave us a few places that my wife and I could go and visit this morning. Apparently we've been here before, but I don't remember. It's been many years. But this morning we had the opportunity to do a little walking around. I won't say hiking. I'm more of a saunterer than a hiker. I like to walk slowly and look and see what's in front of me or above me or below or surrounding me. And I usually do it with a 600 millimeter lens attached to my camera, which is glued to my face, so that's why I go slow. But in any event, we found a couple of really beautiful places this morning. I wish I could remember the name of them. I don't. One was the Canoe Park? Canoe Meadows, which was really gorgeous. There were so many flowers that were out. I don't know all of them. I saw Joe Pieweed and purple loosestrife. Some type of helianthus, a type of sunflower that was blooming all around the marsh. Numerous plants, lots of dragonflies and cedar waxwings and common yellow throats, I don't know, just all manner of things that were out there. And this next song that I'd like to play for you is simply a song for the earth and my love. It's about my love for this earth and everything that lives on it. And my wife will attest to this. I sometimes get so absorbed with looking at and being with this thing that we think of as nature that I lose track of time. Time becomes, I don't know, something that's back behind me somewhere. And this place that we live is amazing. And so this song is just simply about Thanks very much. So I don't really know any other songs, but I'm going to play the same things on the other flutes that I have, and I'll face that way, so it seems like I'm playing them backwards. I'm just joking. Do you have anything you might like to ask? Yes, please.
So do you write a song for one particular flute, or do you then play that song on several flutes and then say, okay, that's the flute that this song belongs to?
Yep. So that's a great question. Sometimes I don't know how to write music, so a song will present itself in a couple of different ways. Sometimes I have an idea for the song, and I hear bits and pieces of it in my head. So I go through a variety of flutes to see which fits the nature of that song. And if I'm not able to find one, then that means I have to build a flute specifically for the song. Then there are other times where I might, be playing just any of my flutes that I have out here now at home, and a song just presents itself. Most oftentimes, in that situation, the flute that I'm playing in that moment is the flute that song wants to be played on. And sometimes I remember it. There are more than one occasion where my wife or one of our daughters will come to the room where I'm playing music, and they'll say, "Oh, whatever that was just beautiful. Just make sure you play it again." And I'm like, "It's too late. It's gone." But then there are times where those songs remain and they become part of the group of songs that I play. And not that you asked this question, but sometimes people will ask or wonder if I improvise, if that's what I'm doing when I'm playing, but I don't improvise. All the songs that I play now are songs that I've been playing for years, or if you see me years from now, there are songs that I'm, same songs. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Yes, you're welcome. Thank you.
I think you're playing a six-volt flute.
Yes.
Do you ever alternate that between 5 and 6, and you prefer one over the other? Or
Do I ever?
alternate between 5-volt and 6-volt flutes? I've seen both.
Yes. There are 5 holes, and the flutes that I play and make are 6-hole flutes, and primarily because it's the way that we've been making them for quite a long time. And I mean, 5-hole flutes are. I don't even own one, but they're really great instruments. So, yeah. Yes.
How old are you and where do you live? Ceremonies?
How old am I, and where do I live, and do I play my flutes for ceremony? The answer to those questions are yes. Okay, in April I'll be 67. My family and I live on the coast of Maine, near Bar Harbor, about an hour up the coast from Bar Harbor. And do I play my flutes for ceremony? Oh, I wish we had days to talk about that. So what I do with my flutes, I've never once thought of as entertainment. My relationship to the flute is that it's a tool for prayer. And so wherever it is that I'm invited to play my flutes, here, Europe, New Orleans Jazz Festival, out in the woods for no reason at all, it's all ceremony, it's all prayer. Thank you for that question.
Question about the mechanics. I was looking at the flutes over there, and to me, there's a very strange mouthpiece thing attached to the side of it, but you're blowing in the end.
Correct.
So how does it work?
So the flute, these flutes are 2-chambered end-blown block flutes. So the 2 chambers are right here where the mouthpiece is begins the first chamber. So it's hollow from that point all the way to right about where this piece of leather is. So inside there's a solid wall of wood. It's hollow from that wall of wood backwards, and from that wall of wood forward, it's hollow. So there's 2 distinct separate chambers. Beneath this piece, which is called the bird, or the block, or the bridge, or the saddle, there are two holes. One is on this side of the wall, the other one is on the other side of the wall. This piece at the top has a channel or a flute that's cut into it, and as you put your breath in, air comes out of the hole. This piece causes it to go forward, and where it hits a certain part of the next hole and creates sound. So this is a very important part of the flute. And to demonstrate that, I'll just blow on it and move it. So this is really critical.
Is that a purely American Indian type of flute thing?
To my knowledge, there aren't any other flutes like this in the world. To my knowledge. Yeah. Yes.
The first flute you played had a lower octave. The second flute you played was a higher octave.
Correct.
The second flute you played, could you play it in a lower octave?
No. So the difference, as you can see, I'm going to put the two birds close to each other because that's where the sound mechanism is. This flute here is considerably shorter than the one here on the right. It's the length of the bore that gives it its fundamental pitch. So the longer the flute, the lower it is, and just the opposite. The higher it is, then the higher pitched it is. I mean, the shorter it is.
I have a high spirits flute, cedar flute,
Oh, high spirits? Mm-hmm.
and every so often I can get a low sound on that, but basically it's this high-pitched sound.
So there are a couple of things that probably contribute to that. It could be the position of the bird, but also, and more probable, it's what you're doing with your breath and your fingers. Those are the two major contributors to playing just the high notes when you want a lower. When you want the lower pitched part of the flute to play, then there's you have to blow with a soft voice, and then also the top holes can't be open; they have to be closed. Yes, please.
I don't mean this to be either or, but do you think you create music or you discover it?
Yes. You're going to hear that a lot tonight, right? Yes. I think music is always around us, and in this universe, in this creation, both the music of creation, which are birds and insects and wind and rain and snow. I mean, there are multiple things that create sound, but I think on another level, there's trying to think best how to word this. There are energies maybe that join together, that come together and present themselves either through people or other objects, other things that we then hear as music. I don't know if that makes sense or not, but that's a really great question that I don't think anyone's ever asked me in all the years I've been doing this. But, yeah, thank you for that question.
How do you choose the wood that you would carve your instrument from?
Primarily, so for the 34 years I've been a flute maker, I use woods that are local to where we live, and I do so, well, how do I choose it? So I walk into the woods with an intention and a gift, and my intention is usually articulated as I'm walking in. I'm looking for, a piece of wood to build a flute with. Who would like to be a flute? And, what ends up happening is that I knock on, I look for standing deadwood, and then when I do see pieces that might be suitable, I knock on them with my finger to listen to how structurally sound they might be, and if they have music in them. So there are some pieces of wood that sound structurally okay, but they don't ring. And then there are other pieces of wood that as soon as you click it with your fingernail or something, you can hear its resonance. So that's what I've done for the majority of my flute making life. And when I travel, I always bring a saw with me because, you know, there's always trees that want to volunteer themselves for you traveling. Lately, I shouldn't say lately, it's been quite a while where I get gifts of wood from other flute makers or woodworkers, or, you know, this flute here was made from the pew of a church. The church was 300 years old, and as it was being deconstructed, a man who's now a friend of ours, he gathered some of this is black walnut. He gathered some of it, and then when we met, he gave me some of it. So gifts come in all different kinds of forms. I mentioned bringing a gift. I'm mindful that whenever I take something from the woods, or really from anywhere, I disrupt life. So even with those standing deadwood trees, there are all kinds of organisms that need that tree. And I leave something important like chocolate. I love chocolate. That's probably more important than money to me. But sometimes I leave money, sometimes I leave a song, or there are times where I've left flutes in gratitude, but also to be mindful that I'm disrupting life. Yeah. Oh, yes?
Have you had the opportunity to play your flutes with orchestras?
With orchestras? Well, that's a really long story, but sure, I have. And I'll tell you more about the story later. In 2007, we went to England, my family and I, and prior to our journey to England, I was contacted by an orchestra called the London Mozart Players. This was in 2007, and they were identified as the premier, the greatest orchestra in Europe. And they asked me if I would compose music to play with them in concert. And so my initial reaction was just to say no. And one reason was that traditionally this flute is played by itself. It's not played with a drum or a rattle or anything, just by itself. And the other reason was I was petrified. And that was probably the biggest reason why I was going to say no. I eventually consented. My wife, who's brilliant, said, well, we'll be in England, and if it comes out horrible, nobody here in the States will know. So we would do it. And so I said, sure, okay. I composed a piece of music that was about 8 or 10 minutes long. And the first 2 concerts that we did concerts in 1,000-year-old churches in the countryside of England. The whole experience had a profound effect on me as a human being, never mind just a flute maker or a flute player. And returning home, prior to this experience, classical music was something that you turned off when it came on the radio. Or if it was on television, you changed the station. Or I did. Afterwards, I couldn't hear it enough. And now, 15 years later, the primary music that I listen to is Baroque and Renaissance and medieval music. And in fact, I did some work with Yo-Yo Ma last year, and we have plans to do more work together. So, anyway, yes.
So who did the orchestration to go with your flute for the Mozart Players?
I'm not sure if I understand that question.
Who composed the music with the violins and
They did.
the other instruments?
They did.
The Mozart Players did.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So I'll play another song for you. I really love all these questions, and I would be so happy to sit here all night and just show you a flute, put it down, and then we could talk all night. And it's probably good that I didn't have coffee. I almost did. This next song that I'll play for you is my wife's favorite song. At least it used to be. It's a song called Earth and Sky. And Earth and Sky, in our stories, Earth is feminine. We often hear Mother Earth, and our stories say that sky is masculine. So this song is about the duality of those energies, the feminine and the masculine, as they exist in all things. And in part, my thinking about this is that it comes from my observations of society at large, and how it seems that maybe we've forgotten the importance of both of these energies. And I say that because, as we know, how our societies at large view women is not the same as how our societies at large view men. And I know that without my mother, I wouldn't exist. Without my father, I wouldn't exist. And so in my way of seeing things, both of these energies, entities, are equally important. And they exist in all things. In the tree, in the whale, in the bear, in all things these energies are. And I like to think that if, as an example, if sky and earth were 20 feet separate, we wouldn't live, because of our life comes from the earth, and of course it comes from the sky as well. So if those energies were really apart, then we couldn't exist. So this song is just simply about honoring the duality of the feminine and masculine energies in each of us. when I first began building flutes, there were a handful of flute makers in the country still. And we know that in part, that's because of genocide, cultural genocide, the effort to exterminate indigenous people from this land. I'm, in a way, when I think about it, and even when I talk about it, this idea that I'm one of the old flute makers now. I mean, literally 34 years ago, there were a handful, 5, maybe 10 at the most. And to this day, you know, I mentioned I've been building flutes for 34 years now. I'm one of the old guys doing it, and I find that to be kind of makes me sad when I think about it. This next couple of songs that I'd like to play are songs that come from other traditions and other people's way with the flute. People who inspired me, people who, if it weren't for them, then I wouldn't be doing what it is that I'm doing. So this first song that I'd like to play for you with that in mind, it comes from Taos Pueblo. There's a man whose name is John Rayner. He's passed away now. I was fortunate to meet John in the latter years of his life, and I did so in kind of in a peculiar way. Where my family and I live, there's a small group of us who are interested in music from around the world, and in particular, this one group, their focus was West African music. And so I used to go and visit with them and sometimes play drums with them and other things. And this went on for 20 years. And one evening, the person whose house that we would always go and make noise at, she said, "Tell me about your life with the flute hawk. You know, how did you get involved with it?" Now, mind you, this woman is a marine biologist. You know, her focus is on cetaceans, and but she has an interest in other music. So we were talking about, I was telling her about how I learned how to build flutes and so forth and so on. And she said, "Well, tell me about the people who inspired you." And so I mentioned a few names, including John Rayner. And when I said his name, her eyes got huge. She said, "John Rayner from Taos Pueblo?" And then my eyes got big because I didn't realize that she would know who he was. I said, "How do you know him?" Her name is Gail. I said, "Gail, how do you know John Rayner?" And she said, kind of sheepishly, "I was his girlfriend in high school." My jaw must have hit the floor. I'm on the coast of Maine, playing music with a cetologist, a marine person who specializes in marine mammals, playing West African music, and she's telling me she's the former girlfriend of a person who I kind of idolized. It's like, whoa, this is a small world. So she introduced me to him, and he and I became friends during the latter part of his life. And one of the reasons why his music really stood out was that a lot of it was the blending of musics from his traditional music, that of his people, Taos, and he also was a music professor at Brigham Young. So a lot of his music brought together the ceremonial music from Taos Pueblo and the religious music from his religion. And it was the synthesis, the joining of those two seemingly different origins of music, but not really. I loved your question. That created something beautiful. And in our world today, oftentimes things that seem to be oppositional to each other, oftentimes religion and different ideologies and politics and whatever, they oftentimes create division amongst people. And I saw his music as an example of how things of seemingly opposite origins can create beauty. So here's a song from Taos Pueblo. Thanks very much.
Do you use circular breathing sometimes?
Sometimes I think I do. When I'm playing my flutes, there's one particular song where I do it a lot, but I play the didgeridoo a little bit, so circular breathing is one of those things that seems to happen naturally even when I'm not thinking about it. But the majority of my breathing with the flute is very short, quick breaths through my nose, so it's not obvious that I'm stopping and breathing. So kind of between passages. That makes sense.
Yeah.
The construction of this one is quite different. At the tail end of it there's a bulbous end and a fork and another opening, and it was quite resonant.
Yeah. So I saw a picture of a flute that another flute maker had made, and he makes replica flutes, and the one that he had made was an old Lakota flute, so one from the plains. And the voices of those flutes are a little bit different than the voices of the kinds of flutes that I usually make. And I couldn't afford to buy one of his replicas, but I could make it. So this is my version of his replica so this is a replica of a replica. And there's a little metal piece that's here, and that little metal piece is pushed forward enough so that the breath can actually, it becomes the cutting edge or the splitting edge, and it's very sharp, so it gives it a much raspier, breathier sound. And the tuning is completely different too. Yes, wait, yes?
Well, this piece is exceptionally beautiful, but I don't think you named it. I don't think you tried. So, what's your name?
Of that song? Oh boy, I wish you didn't ask me that because I actually don't remember it. And I've been playing this song for 10 or 12 years, maybe more, and I honestly don't remember the name of it. Thank you. I was going to say, if you Google John Rayner, he didn't put he made 2 recordings in his life, and if you were to own them, then you would hear that song, but there's not even really many recordings of it, like on YouTube or something, so. Another song that I'll play for you. Oh, wow. Oh, wow. Really? Okay. Are any of you in a rush? Oh, good. Oh, good, okay. Because I haven't even gotten halfway through any of this yet. Okay, so I'll talk really fast. One more short song on this flute. Another old guy, he was Kyle Comanche. He's also passed away. A flute player. I don't think he was a flute maker. His name was Tommy Ware. Tommy Ware. I listened to his music a whole lot in my growing up as a flute player. And some years ago, we were both on the same bill at an event in Louisiana. And when I saw his name on there, I got nervous again. And I thought, hey, how is it that they invited 2 flute players to be in the same place? Well, I was happy to get there to learn that he went there with his blues band, and he didn't have a flute with him. But this song that I'd like to play for you, one of his songs is a Kyle Comanche love song. And some of the people use the flute. When I say the people, indigenous people all over the continent, as you well know, about 680 different nations. Of course, not all of them had the flute, but for those who did, they had different uses. And for some of the people, the flute was used as a courting tool. I am married, I want you to know that. Okay? My wife's over there, so that's a bad joke. So anyway, this is a love song, Kyle Comanche love song. And I honestly think that it certainly is about love between 2 people, but I also think it's about that feminine and masculine energy again. Kyle Comanche love song. think Kate was maybe thinking that we could go an hour and 15 minutes or so, and my wife just kind of signaled me that maybe there was like 5 minutes left in the hour. And I have a number of flutes and then a couple of other instruments that I'd really like to play for you too. So I hope that you're comfortable and you're willing to stay. If you're not, I understand that, and you'll be fined as you leave. Just some years ago, 1 second please. Some years ago, I was giving a presentation at a museum, and the following year they invited me back, surprisingly. And when I returned, the curator there said that after my last presentation, someone returned with a gift for me. And she went to her office to come out with this. And there was a note attached to it, and the person who was giving the gift said that because the flute was inoperable, I could just throw it away and they wouldn't be offended. And so apparently the flute had been either something heavy had fallen on it or it got stepped on or something because it was crushed. And it didn't make any sound. Well, immediately I knew that this was an important instrument and it needed to sing again. So I accepted the gift and returned home and contacted a few friends that are conservators of instruments at various museums, and they all had the same thought, which was do nothing to the instrument, donate it to a museum. And I said, well, why? And they said, so people can see it. Exactly, that was my thought. I said, that's ridiculous. I said, if I'm able to make this play again, then people can see it, they can hear it, they can hold it, and they can play it. I said, it's just like, I like cake. I mentioned chocolate, but I like cake too. I said, imagine the best cake that you could ever imagine under a cake glass, whatever those things are called, and you could look at it, period. What's the point of that, right? So I set about to fix this flute so it could sing again. This flute is about 210, maybe 215 years old. It was made by Potawatomi people. The Potawatomi people are Algonquin people who live around the Great Lakes, but were originally from here in the Northeast. So the Potawatomi people see us, Nipmuc, and other Algonquin peoples here as their grandparents, which is kind of cool, I think. But I love the idea of this old flute because I'm not the first person to put the breath into it. So I always think that whenever I play it, the stories of the other flute players who owned it, who had it before me, become alive again. And I just love that idea. In my workshop, my tools are, most of my tools that I use for making flutes are, well, my hand tools were made in the 1800s. And I love that idea too of using something that other woodworkers have used before I got a hold of it. That way I can blame them for mistakes. But anyway, I'm just going to blow this just a little bit so you can hear it. It's much raspier than any of the other flutes that I've played so far.
my question. Do you ever get invited or play flutes in museums because they have to be kept alive, right? The vibrations.
So only recently, once about 20 years ago, I was actually doing some work in a school, and across the street was an annex of the Peabody. And I'm not sure what her position was, but she happened to be in the school while I was playing. So she invited myself to go, to the Peabody after school and visit with some old flutes. There were a couple of Kiowa flutes, which were nice. But for the most part, museums have been really strict in terms of allowing people to play musical instruments. I think the attitudes and the ideas about conservation were that it's best to keep them in environmentally controlled environments, and that way they'll live forever. But the ideas are changing. So just recently, there was the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston. They had an event, and I played my flutes at the event, but I was also invited to play. They have a very small collection of some old flutes, and I was invited there to play. And then at the Yale, you remember, is Yale Peabody? In Connecticut, they have an extensive collection of old flutes. And I was invited there as well to play some of them. A number of them had been treated with some really harsh kinds of chemicals, so they would have been dangerous for me to play. But the conservators there are doing what they can to kind of mitigate the dangers of those chemicals, and they've invited me back to play them. And I think in general, a number of museums are beginning to understand that to keep an instrument living, it needs to be played. Whether it's a wind instrument or strings, or they need to be played to stay alive.
An anecdotal thing is we met at a show of violins and guitars and so forth going back 600 years. And the curator told me that they do keep them alive by having musicians play them.
Oh.
And what he said is the vibration
Right.
is so important.
Absolutely, absolutely. And for wind instruments, vibration as well as breath, the moisture from your breath, and the moisture and oils from your hands. And I've always said to people, curators and museum people, just take them out at night when no one's around and make noise on them. You don't have to play beautiful music, just let them sing. I'm happy that it's beginning more and more. Yes, please.
It's a follow-up. I'm familiar with guitars that as a player plays a guitar over a period of decades, the molecular structure changes with the play, and that it becomes a personalized extension of a particular player. I'm wondering if that occurs with flutes as you play them. How old is your oldest flute, and is it particular to you?
Since you're asking me that, because there are a number of schools of thought about that, there are some folks who would say that it doesn't really change over years. I tend to think that it does. I think one thing that influences it is what they're finished with. So I use walnut oil as a finish on my flutes. One, because it's edible and it's non-toxic unless somebody's allergic to nuts. But it allows the wood to breathe. My oldest flute, I didn't take home. It's about 27 or 28 years old, and it plays beautifully. It plays considerably different than it did when I first made it. Excuse me. I always encourage people when they purchase flutes from me, there's a certain regimen for taking care of it. One is to play it, or hold it, or some kind of way handle it, another important part is to oil it, and another important part is to not clean it. So, in other words, to not take the patina off of it. The patinas develop, as you well know, when you're handling it and after you're playing it. All of that, to me, contributes to how the wood responds to your breath, how it resonates.
And would another player get the same sound as you do?
Oh, no. I don't know. That's I've never really thought about that, but it's a question that I should consider. because I do have a relationship with the flutes that I play, and I know what to do with them to make them sing a certain way. I think another person would develop a relationship with the flute, and the flute would eventually sing in a way that they want, if that makes sense. That may not be the same way that I want my flutes to sing, but I think it's the same with any musician. You know, you can hear differences in people who play viola da gamba, for example, or baroque oboes, or different approaches. Of course, the makers influence that as well, but how a person approaches the instrument really contributes to what the instrument does, if that makes sense. So I have a couple of non-flute things that I'd like to show, make some noise on really quickly, and then I'll play 2 more quick songs on my flutes, and then I'll let you go home. So is anyone familiar with this one? Oh boy. No one was supposed to say yes, because then I would be comfortable playing it, but since some of you know what it is, you did. You know what it's supposed to sound like. Thumb piano is one name for this instrument. Another name for it is Imbira Sabatsimu. And Imbira Sabatsimu is an instrument, this one, that comes from the Shona people in Zimbabwe. And this instrument in this form is about 700 years old. Prior to this form, the Imbira had, instead of metal keys on it, it had like bamboo or wooden ones. The Imbira Sabatsimu is the Imbira of our ancestors. That's what Sabatsimu is about. And when it's played, of course it's played for music, to dance to tell stories to share knowledge with. But its primary function is to bring the ancestors to be present at any of the functions that are, that the music's being played at. And I love that idea. Yeah, I don't play this really well, but I just like to share it with people. So here's a little bit. Thanks very much. Oh, it's really a wonderful instrument. And I'm holding this one because this is the one I'm going to play next. When I used to drive, well, I still drive, I used to try to play this one while I was like on the highway. This is when we had a band though, no, seriously. So I would throw this up on the dashboard, and then I'd be driving like this while I was trying to play it. That's worse than texting while you're driving. But this is much safer because, I'm serious, no, you can steer with your knees. Okay, I'm just kidding. No, I'm not. I actually just do that. So, I don't know. You can hear me okay, right? Can you hear me right now? Are you familiar with this? Didgeridoo, right. So the didgeridoo, as you well know, comes from Australia. It's about 60,000 years old. It's one of the oldest instruments on the earth, according to the people where it comes from. It comes from the northern parts of Australia. It's referred to as Yidaki. There are a whole lot of different names for it, but Yidaki is one of them. I love the simplicity of this instrument because it's basically a hollow stick that's been hollowed by termites. And there's a little beeswax at the top of it, and this one was painted, but all the paint's worn off. And that's pretty much all it is. You make sound by doing this. And what's brilliant about that, at least for me, when I was in school, I used to get in trouble for making noises like that, and now I get invited to schools to make noises like that. So there's lots of things and lots of sounds that you can make with it. I'm just going to really be brief with it because there really are a couple of other flute songs that I want to play before we have to end. But I just want to give you an example of what this sounds like. Circular breathing. Yes, please.
What is it used for?
Oh. So the didgeridoo, it's used like to share knowledge, to tell stories, for prayer, to make music to dance to. All right. It's used like the ibira, or like the flutes, or even like the harp that the bards in Europe used. In fact, those are the kinds of instruments that I'm drawn to. So the bards were the storytellers, were those who used music for prayer, used music to share knowledge with each other. The didgeridoo, if you have a person who's from the culture, we'll say, both the player and the listener, they can transmit specific pieces of knowledge through certain types of rhythms that are played. I play a harp I have a 36-string folk harp, but I also play a harp from West Africa called kora. In kora, there's 21 strings. Each string represents a verse of the Quran. And when played by someone who's trained, you can recite verses of the Quran by just how you play the different combinations of strings. I can't do that, but someone who's knowledgeable enough can do that. So the didgeridoo is used in the same kind of fashion. someone way in the back had a question.
Same question that Louise had.
Okay. Yes, please.
You're giving us awareness of the various roles, like calling the ancestors, passing on knowledge, courting. Would you have some comments on the concept of the flutes as medicine stick?
I would need to ask you what you mean by medicine.
From my perspective, it's a process that helps to create a greater sense of integration, given that disease is often the result of disintegration. So I've often seen the flute and felt the flute as a medicine stick.
Medicine for the player or for the listeners or for?
Brainwave research shows that it's more medicine for the player, but also for the listener.
Yeah, I think music is that.
Yeah.
I do. I think for the listener as well as the player, and even for those things that may not appear to be listening. We have a house full of plants, and I know the plants just love listening to music, not necessarily me, but as I mentioned, in our house oftentimes is, Renaissance music and Baroque music, or music from other parts of the world, and I think plants respond to it. I sat up at a stream one day with one of my flutes, this was years ago, and when I sat, there were birds in the trees. All the trees and bushes were filled with birds, and I was listening to their songs as I got comfortable, and then I just started playing the flute, and I noticed then that the birds stopped singing. And when I opened my eyes, the birds were all on the rock that I was sitting on.
Wow.
They were listening too. So, I asked about what you're thinking about medicine is, and I'm of the thinking, and I think it's a very similar idea to what yours is. I think that medicine is something that brings balance and health and helps in transition. So medicine isn't always something that restores life, but it helps to transition. So I wish we had a lot of time to talk about that. I'd like to show you, or play just a couple of more really quick songs. Here's a flute. This is unlike all the rest of my flutes because you don't use your mouth to play it. This is played with your nose. Yeah, right? And my friend gave me this flute, and when she told me, I tried to play it like this, and she said, no, you play it with your nose off, and I thought she was joking. And I said, that's disgusting. Why would you want to play a flute with your nose? And she said, why do you want hair on your lip? I said, because it's really cool. She said, imagine if everybody had a mustache like yours. And I thought, yeah, that wouldn't be too cool. No, I probably wouldn't have been attracted to my wife if she had a mustache like that. But you know. So of course I knew what she meant is that, of course we all come to maybe similar things, but from really diverse places. And that if we all did the same exact thing in the same exact way, life would be really boring or maybe impossible. So she explained further that in Hawaii, she's native Hawaiian, this flute is used for prayer. And she went on to explain that their feeling is the cleanest air possible should go into the flute if you're going to use it for prayer. My friend is a physician, and she described to me that the cleanest air that comes from our bodies comes from our noses. It's filtered just as it comes out. And so I love that idea. I find it a little difficult to play when my allergies are, because it gets gross, right? I love saying that to kindergarten kids because they get all funny about it. But it sure helps me to remember that, my way, which is the right way, is only one of many right ways to do things. I can't play this good, especially because my mustache gets in the way and it tickles, but I'll just show you really quickly. That keeps the flute from getting sticky. Thanks very much. I mentioned being in Europe, in England in 2007, and the main purpose of our trip was to, in 2006, America was celebrating John Smith and the founding of Jamestown. So I was invited to bring my flutes and make some noise and to talk, and I did. And I didn't have really great things to say about that myth. But there were a contingent of people from England, and they listened. And after I was finished, they approached me and they said, "Next year we're commemorating John Smith. Would you consider coming to England?" And I said, "Did you listen to anything that I was talking about?" And they said, "Absolutely. That's why we'd like to invite you. We need to hear that." So my family and I spent 3 weeks in Lincolnshire, which is about 4 hours north of London. And I traveled around to lots of different places, some elementary schools and universities, and met with some political dignitaries. I mean, they all wore gold chains, which was really cool. And I actually visited the school that John Smith went to. And so all while we're there, if you're not familiar with this area, you have to imagine we're in the Wolds, and the Wolds are the breadbasket of England. And as far as you can see, there are these quilt-like patchworks of fields. So the fields were divided by ancient hedgerows, 1,500 to 2,000 years old. And some of these fields were 1,000 acres. I mean, they're huge, but when you would stand on one of the little hills, all those hills collectively are called the Wolds. When you stand on them, as far as you could see, it looked like a quilt. Magnificent. All different colors of green. We were there in early July. All different colors of greens, depending on what was being grown, except for one field that we could see in the distance, which was purple or blue. I forget, but it wasn't green. And so one day we decided that we would go and find that field. And we happened to get there the day that the farmer was at the field. And we introduced ourselves and, mentioned why we were there. And he invited us into his field and began telling us about what he was growing. And 7 species of bees needed to grow the plants that he was growing. Excuse me. And so we were having a lovely conversation. Smiles and, just having a great time with each other. And then his demeanor changed. He went from being kind of gregarious and outgoing to kind of sad. And he looked at me very seriously and he said, "I'd like to apologize to you." And I said, "For what?" He said, "For what my ancestors did to yours." And my initial reaction was to say, "Oh, it's not needed. Your apology's not needed because it wasn't you." But I didn't say that. I stood silently for a minute, and then I accepted his apology. Because in that moment, he was giving me a piece of him, and I couldn't refuse that. You know, I had to make it whole, his gift. I had to make it whole by receiving it. So I did. And then we talked for a while, and as we all know, he's talking about genocide. He's talking about his ancestors coming here and making every effort possible to eradicate all of us. And sadly, that hasn't ended in many cases. But one of the examples of it, I was giving a talk at UMass at Amherst, and I was talking with history students and mentioning Lord Jeffrey Amherst, and he wrote that the way to get rid of all the native people, different words, is to pass out blankets with diseases that they have no immunities to. So he wrote that. The paper is in the town hall at Amherst, Massachusetts. But all of the history students, none of them believed me. They thought I was making this up. So their homework assignment was to go read the document. But back to England, the farmer said, oh, before we came to your home, the Romans and the Normans and the Celts came to our home and did those things to us. It's how we learned what to do to you. And he said, what do we do to stop one people's from hurting another people's like that? And we both kind of came to the same conclusion that it's really incumbent upon each of us. That when we see injustice in the world, it's incumbent upon us to make a change with an individual. Certainly big giant political things and big giant activists and movements, those things can be effective. I think it's equally powerful to interact with individuals. So I also think that, I know this has nothing to do with what I'm here doing, but I want my daughters to have a nice place to live when they get to be my age. I want them to live in a world that's filled with love and compassion and empathy and kindness, and that's my job. That's our job. We were at an event I don't know when it was, a few days ago maybe. Oh no, we were at a garden. I was taking pictures of butterflies, and a few people just stopped and started chit-chatting about plants or bugs or something. And I left feeling so good that someone just took a moment out of their life, out of their day, out of whatever it was that they were doing, just to talk with me. And I think if I could feel that way, imagine what it feels like when we interact that way with each other. When we look at, pass by a stranger and smile and just say hi. We just keep walking, because we don't have to do more than that. Or if we see somebody that has something beautiful on, we could just say, oh, that's a beautiful thing that you have. And just keep walking. Just throw little bits of kindness out into the world. I think it's powerful. This song that I'd like to play for you is about that whole idea of genocide and the angst that I used to feel, the anger, the rage that I used to feel about it, and me coming to the realization that holding that rage didn't do anything but make me ill. And so learning about my own rage and then learning about the cultures that I was angry at was a way for me to reconcile some of these emotions. And of course, what I learned was that our cultures aren't any different. If we look far enough back historically at old cultures of Europe, they weren't different than the indigenous cultures here. And my feeling is that if we recognize that, if we see that in each other, then we can honor that thread of commonality that we all share. And I think as a consequence, the world can be nice. So here's this. Do you see how wide it is? So it's two flutes in one body. So one side you play the melody, and the other side is just a drone. So, and I made it specifically for that song 27 or so years ago. I wanted to play the song on bagpipes, but I didn't have bagpipes, so that's as close as I could get. At the time, I never heard of that kind of flute, but now they're pretty common. Drone flutes, as a lot of people call them. I'm going to play you two more short songs, if that's okay. They're really short, even though this is a long flute. This song that I'd like to play for you comes from a visit, well, in part inspired by a visit to Joyce Kilmer Forest. Joyce Kilmer Forest is in North Carolina, and it's described as the last stand of virgin hardwood trees, east of the Mississippi River. And I wanted to go, I needed to go, my family and I needed to go and visit with these big old trees. And they're magnificent. If you haven't had a chance, if you get an opportunity to go, I would encourage you to go and visit with these old trees. So as my head oftentimes does, I started questioning, why are there so few old trees? There's a place in Newport, Rhode Island, the White Horse Tavern. Anyone ever been there? It's a great place, isn't it? There are floorboards in there that are like this wide. It's the Kingswood. There were timbers that were slated to go to Europe to become masts and part of ships. I don't know how they stole them and made them into this. This tavern was built in the 1600s. It's really awesome. So of course we know that wood, lumber, trees are really important for our survival. But why only the old ones? And what I started thinking about was that maybe the value of the old ones was seen more in monetary ways than in the value of its living in what we can gather from its living, which probably makes no sense. But there was a time in our collective histories where the young people in the communities would go and visit with the elders. They would gather knowledge and experience and learn about life. But that doesn't happen the way it used to. And again, it made me think, maybe we've forgotten the importance of old. And I say old with the biggest capital O possible, with the most respect possible. Maybe we've forgotten the importance of the old knowledge, the old ways. And so I wanted to make a song that honored this old knowledge, and the old knowledge that comes from humans or tree or whales, wherever that old knowledge is. I desire to sit with it and listen to the stories and gather my own knowledge. And so the song is just about, those kinds of things. Yeah. So this last song that I'll play for you is a song for the birds. I love birds, and I have all my life. And my interest in birds began when I was maybe, 8 years old. And not intentionally, mind you. I would get in trouble. I know you'll find that hard to believe, but I did. I got in trouble. And when I did, I would get grounded. That was probably the most horrendous punishment, consequence that a parent could levy upon their child. You're grounded. It meant, of course, that I couldn't leave the yard, and my friends couldn't come in the yard, so I had to sit in the yard by myself, being upset at my mean parents, not at what I had done, but at them. And so we were fortunate. Our yard, we had a few different fruit trees, a few different types of apples and pears and some grapevines. And whenever I would get grounded, I would go and sit in one of those trees. And the first few times, the birds would fly away. But after a while, they kind of got used to me, and they didn't fly away. And I started watching what they were doing. And it was at that time in my life that I really fell in love with them. And today, still, I'm an avid, dangerous bird watcher. When I'm driving, I have one eye in the sky and the other one in the woods. Which doesn't leave too many for the road, but so this song, the one thing that birds do, and they do many things, but one thing for me that I really like to think about is that there are so many different colors of birds, so many different sizes and shapes, and they each have different jobs in the world. Some sing sweetly, and some sound like me, like they don't sing sweetly, and it reminds me that all of us, no matter what our appearances are, no matter what our station in life is, no matter what it is that we bring to where we live, it's important. And if we didn't bring this thing to where we live, then the world would be an entirely different place. So birds help me to remember that. So here's a song for them. Consume your time and for inviting me to be here with you. Thank you very much.
Come back.